Welcome back. It's time now for a check of all the media here in France. And for that, I'm joined by our very own James Creedon. Hello, James.
Good evening indeed, Tom.
Now, next Monday it marks the 50th anniversary of the Algerian War. And it's, of course, a huge topic right now, isn't it, in the French media?
That's right. It's really it is the topic that is dominating media discussion today. So just ahead of Monday's anniversary of that 50 years since independence. So let's take a look at what the media are saying about it. France Culture radio station has been broadcasting all day today from Algiers. So they have a full day-long special from Algiers. If you move to other websites, this is on our sister network RFI, and they have put in place a timeline. So for people who are interested in the individual events of that war, which lasted from 1954 through to 1962, the key events are there, done in a very nice interactive way for people who read French. France Inter, another radio station, they are looking at the issue of conscripts, because in fact the Algerian War, that 8-year war from 1954 to 1962, was the very last war in which French people had to go through conscription. So a lot of people telling their stories. There was also a lot of torture practiced by the French army in Algeria. So many people very much marked by that. And in many of their, what they're saying to France Inter and other networks, they speak about that, about how they, committed terrible acts and are haunted by them, as I suppose is often the case for former soldiers. So if we have a look at TV5 Monde, they have quite an interesting history segment every week, L'Histoire en Marche, History on the Move. And here they're talking about the difficulty in, I suppose, for historians in writing about that period, because it is still in living memory. And indeed, from 1962 through to 1982, the French state didn't speak about the Algerian War. There was no talk of war. It was referred to as the events, les événements, or indeed Opération de maintien de l'ordre, operations for maintaining peace and order. And it was only in 1999 that a law was passed by the French Parliament to recognise it for what it was, a war. And indeed, he speaks also in this segment on TV5 Monde about the difficulty in coming up with a common version of those events, because, of course, the French and the Algerians don't necessarily agree on everything. Now, in Slate Afrique, they're also talking about it, Slate Africa. They're talking about how the Accord d'Évian, the Avian Accords, which mark the 50th anniversary of independence, aren't really a big event in Algeria at all, because it's the political end of, I suppose, the period, whereas what Algerians remember more is the military events. So this particular date, the 19th of March, doesn't mean as much to Algerians as it does to French. And indeed, El Watan, an Algerian newspaper, just to finish with this, they're looking at how in Algeria there is a very, very much an official version of what happened in the War of Independence. The current government, led by Bouteflika, who himself fought during the War of Independence, they're very much attached to their version of the story, the official version of history, in which they come out looking very well indeed. So while many people are trying to, this article is speaking about film and about cinema, and how about 150 screenplays have been handed into the Culture Ministry to capture the events of the War of Independence, but all of them have to be checked and vetted by the Culture Ministry, because a law was passed last year to that effect. So in other words, they don't want any sort of, what would you say, unpleasing versions of events to kind of get through. So they're very much vetting these screenplays and making sure that they are what would you say, that they conform to the official version of events.
All right, so 50 years on, still very differing versions of events there in Algeria. Now, on a more festive note, shall we say, it's St. Patrick's Day this weekend, which must mean you're excited, I'd imagine. And so are the French, by the sound of things, because they're getting interested in certain foods and not so much the Guinness,
That's right. They're much more interested in the corned beef side of things, it appears. Now, Le Monde's culinary columnist, a guy by the name of J.P. Genet, is writing quite an interesting historical piece about the dish. So they seem to be less interested in the pub culture and more interested in what people eat on St. Patrick's Day, which is kind of missing the point for many. But what they point out is that for French people between the ages of 7 and 77, when you think of corned beef, instantly you think of Tintin and his adventures in America, because apparently he went to a Chicago abattoir where the cows were going on this conveyor belt, wagging their tails, and they came out the other end as tins of corned beef. So for French people, corned beef has connotations of terrible processed food. So what J.P. Genet is trying to impress on his readers is that it's actually quite a delicious dish, and he gives a lovely recipe for corned beef, and goes on to explain that it was actually a dish that kind of was popularized amongst the New York diaspora from the 17th to the 19th century. And for more details on that, you can read Oliver Farry's blog, and he gives even more details about how it was a dish that emerged in New York because the Irish diaspora couldn't get their hands on pork. So they, their Jewish neighbors had salted beef, and that's how corned beef became popular. So there you go. Lots of interesting details on corned beef this weekend on France 24's blogs and in Le Monde.
All right. Well, you'll be celebrating, no doubt, this weekend. If you are, I hope you'll let me know where.
Absolutely.
Now, you've got a little bit of French political humour for us just before we go to those celebrations that I'm sure you're lining up for us later this evening.
Absolutely. Now, French political humour, it's always difficult to translate, but we'll try. Pierre Moscovici, he is the PR guy, the communications director for François Hollande. Now, he was trying to plug François Hollande's website, www.toushollande.fr, everybody for Hollande.fr, except he said tous sauf Hollande. Everybody but Hollande. So you don't really want your communications director plugging the name of your website and saying that it's actually anybody but Hollande, which was actually a slogan for Bush in 1994, anybody but Bush. But anyway, maybe that's what he had in mind. Which, the thing is, French political humour, they like Freudian slips. They come up regularly again and again and again. So two others, just to leave you with, Tom. You have Rachida Dati, who instead of saying inflation said fellation. So inflation and fellation, which means fellatio.
Yes.
So not the same thing as inflation.
Not necessarily,
and Claude Guéant, Interior Minister, he was talking about the electoral code, but he said the code électoral instead of the code électoral, which means the electoral dildo. So French people get very titillated and they really enjoy these slips of the tongue, and they get catalogued. So every time there's another Freudian slip, all of these past Freudian slips are catalogued in the media, as they have been today.
Well, James, I'm afraid to say I think you look like you're rather enjoying those slips of the tongue as well.
Well, electoral dildo, it's when do you get the chance to say
enough. That's where we're going to leave it this time. Thank you very much indeed, James Creedon. That was Media Watch. Let's get a quick check now of what's getting people clicking, blogging and tweeting. Our daily date with cyberspace web news starts right now.